The sun blazed over Ouagadougou as Captain Ibrahim Traore adjusted his military uniform one final time before entering the presidential palace. At just 34 years old, he had become the youngest leader in Africa after leading a successful coup in Burkina Faso. The weight of his nation's struggles pressed heavily on his shoulders as he walked through corridors that had seen too many broken promises and failed dreams. Burkina Faso was drowning in poverty. The landlocked West African nation, once known as Upper Volta, had been bleeding resources for decades. Gold mines operated by foreign companies extracted billions worth of precious metals, yet the local population remained trapped in cycles of hunger and desperation. Ibrahim had witnessed children die from preventable diseases while international corporations celebrated record profits from Burkinabe soil. The young captain's rise to power hadn't been planned. Originally serving as a lieutenant in the National Army, Ibrahim had watched his country's resources flow out while his people suffered. The breaking point came when he saw families selling their few possessions just to afford basic medical treatment. Something deep inside him snapped, and he knew the old system had to change completely. His military training had taught him strategy and patience, but nothing had prepared him for the complex world of international politics. Foreign ambassadors lined up to meet the new leader, each carrying briefcases full of promises and contracts that seemed designed to continue the same exploitation under different names. European companies offered development aid with strings attached, while American corporations proposed mining deals that would benefit everyone except ordinary Burkinabe citizens. Ibrahim studied each proposal carefully, but his advisors warned him about the dangers of rejecting powerful Western interests. Previous African leaders who had tried to break free from colonial-era economic arrangements often faced mysterious accidents, sudden coups, or international sanctions that crippled their nations. The young captain knew he was walking a dangerous path, but the suffering of his people left him no choice. Late one evening, while reviewing yet another disappointing proposal from a French mining company, Ibrahim's foreign minister burst into his office with unexpected news. A delegation from Pakistan had requested an urgent meeting to discuss a potential partnership that could transform Burkina Faso's economic future. The Pakistani team claimed they weren't interested in the usual exploitative arrangements that had characterized Africa's relationships with foreign powers. Pakistan itself had experienced similar colonial exploitation and understood the struggle for genuine economic independence. The South Asian nation had built successful industries despite facing international pressure and sanctions. Most importantly, Pakistan's approach to partnerships emphasized mutual benefit rather than one-sided extraction of resources. Ibrahim felt a spark of hope for the first time since taking power. Here was a potential partner that understood the pain of exploitation and had successfully broken free from economic colonialism. The Pakistani delegation promised to discuss deals that would actually benefit ordinary Burkinabe people, not just foreign shareholders and local elites. As news of the potential Pakistan partnership spread through government circles, reactions were mixed. Some advisors worried about angering traditional Western partners who controlled much of Burkina Faso's international trade. Others argued that continuing with failed policies would only perpetuate the nation's suffering. Ibrahim knew that whatever decision he made would determine his country's future for generations. The young leader spent sleepless nights walking through Ouagadougou's streets, observing the daily struggles of his people. Street vendors worked 18-hour days for barely enough money to feed their families. Students attended classes in buildings without electricity or proper books. Hospitals lacked basic equipment while gold worth millions of dollars left the country every single day. Ibrahim's determination grew stronger with each conversation he had with ordinary citizens. They didn't need more foreign aid that disappeared into corrupt officials' pockets. They needed genuine partnerships that would create jobs, build infrastructure, and give young people hope for better futures. The Pakistani proposal seemed to offer exactly what his people desperately needed. International observers began paying closer attention to developments in Burkina Faso. The prospect of a major partnership between Pakistan and the West African nation raised eyebrows in Washington, Paris, and London. Some analysts worried that successful South-South cooperation could inspire other African nations to seek alternatives to traditional Western partnerships. Ibrahim understood that his next decision would be the most important of his young presidency. The Pakistani delegation was scheduled to arrive within days, carrying proposals that could either transform his nation or create powerful new enemies. Either way, there was no turning back from the path toward genuine independence and dignity for his people. The Pakistani delegation arrived at Ouagadougou International Airport on a humid Tuesday morning, stepping off their chartered plane with briefcases full of proposals that would reshape West Africa's economic landscape. Leading the team was Dr. Rashid Ahmed, Pakistan's Minister of Foreign Trade, a seasoned diplomat who had negotiated some of his country's most successful international partnerships. Dr. Ahmed's reputation preceded him throughout diplomatic circles. He had successfully brokered Pakistan's landmark deals with China under the Belt and Road Initiative, securing billions in infrastructure investments without compromising his nation's sovereignty. His approach differed dramatically from Western negotiation tactics, focusing on long-term mutual benefits rather than quick resource extraction. Ibrahim Traore personally greeted the Pakistani team at the airport, a gesture that surprised many observers. African presidents rarely met foreign delegations directly unless they represented major world powers. This simple act sent a clear message to both domestic and international audiences that Burkina Faso was serious about exploring new partnerships beyond traditional colonial relationships. The first meeting took place in the presidential palace's main conference room, where maps of both countries covered the walls alongside charts showing their respective natural resources and industrial capabilities. Dr. Ahmed began his presentation by acknowledging the shared history of colonial exploitation that both nations had endured. This resonated deeply with Ibrahim, who had grown tired of Western officials lecturing him about democracy while their companies stripped his country's wealth. Pakistan's proposal was unlike anything Ibrahim had seen before. Instead of focusing solely on extracting Burkina Faso's gold, cotton, and other raw materials, the Pakistani plan emphasized building local processing capabilities. They wanted to establish textile factories that would transform Burkinabe cotton into finished products, creating thousands of jobs while adding significant value to exports. The gold mining component was equally innovative. Rather than traditional concessions that gave foreign companies majority ownership of mines, Pakistan proposed joint ventures where Burkina Faso would maintain controlling stakes while benefiting from Pakistani expertise in mineral processing and international marketing. All refined gold would be processed locally, ensuring that value-added activities remained in African hands. Dr. Ahmed explained Pakistan's vision for South-South cooperation, emphasizing partnerships between developing nations that had successfully broken free from economic colonialism. He shared examples of Pakistani companies that had built successful industries despite facing international sanctions and pressure. These companies understood the challenges of operating in difficult environments while maintaining ethical business practices. The infrastructure component of the proposal captured Ibrahim's imagination most powerfully. Pakistan offered to build a network of roads, railways, and telecommunication systems that would connect Burkina Faso with neighboring countries and international markets. Unlike typical foreign aid projects that created dependency relationships, these infrastructure investments would be jointly owned and operated by both countries. Education and technology transfer formed another crucial element of the Pakistani proposal. They wanted to establish technical universities and training centers that would equip young Burkinabe citizens with skills needed for modern industries. Pakistani engineers and technicians would work alongside local counterparts, ensuring genuine knowledge transfer rather than permanent dependency on foreign expertise. During private discussions, Dr. Ahmed shared Pakistan's own experience breaking free from economic colonialism. He described how his country had faced immense pressure when it chose to develop independent nuclear and aerospace capabilities. International sanctions had been painful, but they had forced Pakistan to develop indigenous industrial capacity that now formed the backbone of its economy. Ibrahim was particularly impressed by Pakistan's approach to financial arrangements. Instead of demanding immediate repayment of loans with punitive interest rates, Pakistan proposed flexible payment schedules based on Burkina Faso's actual economic performance. Revenue-sharing agreements would ensure that both countries benefited proportionally from successful ventures. The Pakistani team also addressed security concerns that had plagued Burkina Faso for years. Jihadist groups had been destabilizing the region, partly due to economic desperation that drove young people toward extremism. Pakistan offered to share counter-terrorism expertise while addressing root causes through job creation and educational opportunities. International media began paying attention to the unprecedented negotiations taking place in Ouagadougou. Western diplomats expressed concerns about growing Chinese and Pakistani influence in Africa, while some African observers celebrated the possibility of genuine South-South partnerships that could reduce dependency on former colonial powers. Behind closed doors, Ibrahim's advisors debated the potential risks and benefits of accepting Pakistan's proposals. Traditional allies in France and the United States had already begun expressing displeasure about Burkina Faso's exploration of alternative partnerships. Some officials worried about economic retaliation that could harm the country's existing trade relationships. However, Ibrahim remained focused on the transformative potential of the Pakistani proposals. For the first time since independence, his country had an opportunity to build genuine industrial capacity while maintaining ownership of its natural resources. The young leader knew that this decision would define his legacy and his nation's future for decades to come. As negotiations continued through the week, both teams worked around the clock to address technical details and potential challenges. The complexity of the proposed partnership required careful planning to ensure success, while avoiding the pitfalls that had destroyed previous African development initiatives. Every clause in the emerging agreement would need to serve both countries' long-term interests. The third day of negotiations revealed the true scope of Pakistan's ambitious vision for Burkina Faso. Dr. Ahmed unveiled detailed blueprints for what he called the Sahel Industrial Revolution, a comprehensive development plan that would transform the landlocked nation into West Africa's manufacturing hub within a decade. The centerpiece of the proposal was a massive industrial complex to be built outside Ouagadougou, covering over 50 square kilometers. This facility would house textile mills, gold refineries, agricultural processing plants, and assembly factories for electronics and machinery. Pakistani engineers had studied Burkina Faso's geography carefully, selecting locations with optimal access to transportation routes and natural resources. Ibrahim walked through the detailed architectural renderings with growing excitement. The proposed industrial complex included worker housing, schools, hospitals, and recreational facilities, creating complete communities rather than exploitative factory towns. Pakistani planners had learned from their own industrial development mistakes, ensuring that economic growth would benefit ordinary workers and their families. The financial structure of the deal was equally impressive. Pakistan proposed investing $1.2 billion over 5 years, with payments structured to minimize debt burden on Burkina Faso's government. Instead of traditional loans, most funding would come through equity partnerships, where both countries shared ownership and profits from successful ventures. Dr. Ahmed explained how Pakistani textile companies had conquered international markets, despite facing discrimination from Western buyers who preferred dealing with established suppliers. Burkinabe cotton, known for its exceptional quality, could become the raw material for globally competitive textile exports that would generate billions in annual revenue. The gold processing component promised even greater returns. Rather than selling raw ore to foreign smelters at discount prices, Burkina Faso would refine its gold locally using Pakistani technology and expertise. Finished gold products would command premium prices on international markets, with profits shared between both partner nations. Agricultural transformation formed another pillar of the Pakistani proposal. Burkina Faso's fertile soils could support modern farming techniques that would dramatically increase crop yields. Pakistani agricultural experts wanted to introduce high-yield seeds, irrigation systems, and processing facilities that would make the country food self-sufficient while generating agricultural exports. Technology transfer was woven throughout every aspect of the partnership. Pakistani universities would establish satellite campuses in Burkina Faso, offering engineering, business, and technical programs taught in French and local languages. Scholarships would send promising Burkinabe students to Pakistan for advanced training, creating a generation of locally educated professionals. The transportation infrastructure component addressed one of Burkina Faso's biggest development challenges. Being landlocked made importing and exporting goods extremely expensive, limiting economic growth. Pakistan proposed building rail connections to ports in neighboring Ghana and Ivory Coast, reducing shipping costs while creating new trade opportunities. Telecommunications infrastructure would connect rural areas to global markets through high-speed internet and mobile networks. Pakistani companies had extensive experience building communication systems in challenging environments, having connected remote mountain villages throughout their own country despite difficult terrain and security challenges. Ibrahim was particularly impressed by Pakistan's commitment to environmental sustainability. Unlike extractive industries that left permanent environmental damage, the proposed facilities would use clean technologies that minimized pollution while maximizing resource efficiency. Solar and wind power would supply much of the industrial complex's energy needs. The security aspects of the partnership addressed immediate concerns about regional instability. Pakistani military advisors would help train Burkinabe forces in counterterrorism techniques while economic development reduced the poverty that fueled extremist recruitment. Jobs and education opportunities would give young people alternatives to joining armed groups. During evening discussions, Dr. Ahmed shared Pakistan's philosophy of economic development based on dignity and self-reliance. He contrasted this with Western aid programs that created permanent dependency while enriching foreign consultants and contractors. Pakistani partnerships aim to make partner countries completely self-sufficient within reasonable time frames. The cultural compatibility between Pakistan and Burkina Faso surprised many observers. Both countries had Muslim majorities with secular governments, similar colonial experiences, and strong traditions of hospitality and mutual respect. Pakistani negotiators demonstrated genuine understanding of African customs and values, unlike Western officials who often appeared condescending or impatient. International reactions to the emerging partnership grew increasingly intense. French officials privately warned Ibrahim about the dangers of abandoning traditional relationships with Europe, while American diplomats questioned Pakistan's motives and capabilities. Some Western media outlets began publishing critical articles about Pakistani business practices in other developing countries. However, leaders from other African nations expressed strong interest in the Burkina Faso-Pakistan model. Presidents from Mali, Niger, and Chad quietly sent representatives to observe the negotiations, hoping to replicate similar partnerships in their own countries. The prospect of genuine South-South cooperation was generating excitement throughout the continent. Ibrahim faced intense pressure from various domestic constituencies. Traditional business elites who profited from existing arrangements with foreign companies opposed changes that might reduce their influence. However, ordinary citizens who heard about the proposed job creation and infrastructure development overwhelmingly supported exploring new partnerships. The young president spent hours walking through Ouagadougou's markets, listening to vendors, farmers, and workers discuss their hopes for economic transformation. Their enthusiasm reinforced his determination to pursue partnerships that would actually benefit his people, rather than foreign shareholders and local intermediaries. As the week of negotiations concluded, both teams worked frantically to address remaining technical issues and potential obstacles. The complexity of the proposed partnership required careful coordination between multiple government agencies, private companies, and international organizations. Success would depend on maintaining political will and technical competence throughout the implementation process. The moment of truth arrived on Friday evening as both negotiating teams prepared to finalize the historic agreement. Ibrahim Traore sat in his private office reviewing the final draft of the partnership document, knowing that his signature would either transform his nation's destiny or create powerful enemies who might destroy everything he had worked to build. Dr. Ahmed had spent the previous night addressing last-minute concerns raised by Burkina Faso's economic advisors. Some technical experts worried about Pakistan's ability to deliver on such ambitious promises, given the country's own economic challenges and competing international commitments. Others questioned whether local infrastructure could support the massive industrial development being proposed. The Pakistani delegation had anticipated these concerns and prepared detailed responses based on their successful partnerships in other developing countries. They presented case studies from Bangladesh, where Pakistani textile companies had created hundreds of thousands of jobs while maintaining profitable operations. Similar examples from Kenya and Tanzania demonstrated Pakistan's commitment to sustainable development partnerships. International pressure on Ibrahim intensified dramatically as news of the impending agreement leaked to diplomatic circles. The French ambassador requested an urgent meeting, warning about potential consequences of abandoning traditional partnerships with European nations. American officials expressed concerns about Chinese influence flowing through Pakistani companies with ties to Beijing. Despite external pressure, Ibrahim remained focused on the transformative potential of the Pakistani proposals. He had witnessed decades of failed Western aid programs that enriched consultants while leaving ordinary Burkinabe citizens trapped in poverty. The Pakistani model offered genuine hope for breaking cycles of dependency and exploitation that had plagued his nation since independence. The signing ceremony was scheduled for Saturday morning in the presidential palace's main hall, with representatives from both governments, business leaders, and international media in attendance. Security preparations were extensive, reflecting concerns about potential disruption from opponents of the partnership. On Friday night, Ibrahim convened his cabinet for final discussions about the agreement's implications. Finance Minister Fatima Ouedraogo expressed enthusiasm about revenue projections, showing dramatic increases in government income within 3 years. Defense Minister Paul Sandaogo supported the security cooperation components that would help combat regional terrorism. However, Foreign Minister Jean-Baptiste Compaoré warned about potential retaliation from traditional Western partners who might view the Pakistani partnership as a threat to their interests in West Africa. He cited examples from other African countries that had faced economic sanctions or political destabilization after pursuing independent foreign policies. Ibrahim listened carefully to all perspectives before making his final decision. The risks were undeniable, but the potential benefits far outweighed continuing with failed policies that had produced nothing but poverty and frustration. His people deserved leaders willing to take calculated risks for genuine progress, rather than playing it safe while the nation stagnated. The Pakistani team spent Friday evening conducting final technical reviews with their counterparts from various Burkinabe government ministries. Mining officials verified details about gold processing facilities, while agricultural experts confirmed plans for crop diversification and mechanization programs. Education ministry representatives reviewed scholarship programs and university partnerships. Dr. Ahmed held a private meeting with Ibrahim to address any remaining concerns about Pakistan's long-term commitment to the partnership. He emphasized that this agreement represented more than a business deal. It was part of Pakistan's broader strategy to build lasting relationships with African nations based on mutual respect and shared prosperity. The Pakistani minister shared his country's own experience with Western pressure during critical development phases. He described how Pakistan had faced sanctions and diplomatic isolation when it pursued independent nuclear and aerospace capabilities. These challenges had been painful, but ultimately strengthened Pakistan's resolve to achieve genuine self-reliance. International. Media coverage of the impending agreement varied dramatically depending on the source. Western outlets emphasized potential risks and questioned Pakistan's motives, while media from developing countries celebrated the emergence of South-South partnerships that could reduce dependence on former colonial powers. African Union officials expressed cautious optimism about the Burkina Faso-Pakistan model, suggesting that successful implementation could inspire similar partnerships throughout the continent. However, they also warned about potential backlash from established powers who might view growing South-South cooperation as a threat to their economic and political influence. Chinese observers followed the negotiations with particular interest, Seeing parallels to their own Belt and Road Initiative partnerships in Africa, some analysts suggested that successful Pakistani investments in Burkina Faso could complement Chinese infrastructure projects in neighboring countries, creating regional economic integration that bypassed traditional Western-dominated trade routes. As Saturday morning approached, both teams completed final preparations for the historic signing ceremony. Legal experts had reviewed every clause of the agreement to ensure compliance with international law and both countries' constitutional requirements. Technical specifications for industrial facilities had been verified by independent engineering consultants. Ibrahim spent his final evening as president of an economically dependent nation, walking through Ouagadougou's streets, observing the daily struggles that had motivated his pursuit of transformative partnerships. Street children begged for food while luxury cars carrying foreign businessmen passed by, highlighting the inequality that had persisted despite decades of foreign aid and investment. The young president felt the weight of history on his shoulders as he prepared to sign an agreement that could either vindicate his revolutionary vision or destroy his political career. Either way, he was determined to give his people a genuine chance at prosperity and dignity, rather than continuing with policies that had failed for generations. Saturday morning dawned clear and bright, with crowds gathering outside the presidential palace hours before the scheduled ceremony. News of the historic partnership had spread throughout Ouagadougou, generating excitement among ordinary citizens who saw hope for better economic opportunities for their children and grandchildren. The presidential palace buzzed with unprecedented activity as dignitaries from across West Africa and South Asia gathered for the historic signing ceremony. Ibrahim Traore stood at his office window watching the crowds that had gathered outside, their faces filled with hope and anticipation for what many believed could transform their nation's future forever. Dr. Rashid Ahmed arrived at the palace accompanied by a delegation of Pakistani business leaders, engineers, and government officials who would oversee implementation of the massive development program. The Pakistani minister carried with him formal documentation worth $1.2 billion in commitments, representing the largest foreign investment in Burkina Faso's history. International media attention was intense, with reporters from major news organizations covering what many described as a potential turning point in Africa's economic relationships with the developing world. Camera crews positioned themselves throughout the palace grounds, while journalists prepared to broadcast the ceremony live to audiences across multiple continents. The signing took place in the palace's grand ceremonial hall, beneath portraits of Burkina Faso's founding fathers who had dreamed of genuine economic independence that had remained elusive for decades. Ibrahim wore his military dress uniform while Dr. Ahmed appeared in traditional Pakistani formal attire, symbolizing the cultural bridge being built between Africa and South Asia. As Ibrahim signed his name on the historic agreement, he felt the weight of generations of colonial exploitation being lifted from his nation's shoulders. The document represented more than business partnerships. It was a declaration of independence from economic systems designed to keep African nations permanently dependent on former colonial powers. Dr. Ahmed's signature completed the formal agreement, creating legal frameworks for the most ambitious South-South development partnership in modern African history. The Pakistani minister spoke eloquently about shared struggles against colonialism and the importance of developing nations supporting each other's progress toward genuine prosperity. Immediate reactions to the signed agreement varied dramatically depending on the observer's perspective and interests. Thousands of Burkinabe citizens celebrated in the streets outside the palace, viewing the partnership as validation of their young president's revolutionary vision for economic transformation. Western diplomatic reactions were swift and largely negative. French officials expressed disappointment about Burkina Faso's decision to pursue partnerships that could reduce European economic influence in the region. American diplomats questioned Pakistan's ability to deliver on such ambitious promises, while suggesting potential security implications of growing South Asian presence in West Africa. However, leaders from other African nations reacted with enthusiasm and interest. Presidents from Mali, Niger, Chad, and Ghana sent congratulatory messages while privately exploring possibilities for similar partnerships with Pakistan or other non-Western countries. The success or failure of the Burkina Faso model would influence economic policies throughout the continent. Implementation of the agreement began immediately, with Pakistani advance teams arriving within days to conduct detailed surveys of proposed industrial sites and infrastructure projects. These technical experts worked closely with Burkinabe counterparts to finalize locations for textile mills, gold refineries, and agricultural processing facilities. The first major milestone was groundbreaking for the Central Industrial Complex, outside Ouagadougou, scheduled for just 3 months after the signing ceremony. Pakistani construction companies had already begun shipping equipment and materials needed for the massive development project that would create thousands of jobs. During the construction phase alone, educational partnerships launched simultaneously with the Industrial Development Program. Pakistani universities established recruitment offices in major Burkinabe cities, offering scholarships for engineering, business, and technical programs. The first group of Burkinabe students would travel to Pakistan within 6 months to begin advanced training programs. Technology transfer initiatives began with the arrival of Pakistani engineers and technicians who would work alongside local counterparts on all major projects. Unlike typical foreign aid programs that relied permanently on expatriate expertise, the Pakistani model emphasized rapid knowledge transfer to build indigenous capabilities. Agricultural modernization programs started in rural areas where Pakistani experts introduced high-yield seeds, irrigation techniques, and mechanized farming methods that could dramatically increase crop production. These initiatives included training programs for local farmers and establishment of agricultural extension services. International financial markets reacted positively to news of the partnership, with Burkina Faso's currency strengthening against major international currencies. Investment analysts noted that successful implementation could make the West African nation an attractive destination for additional foreign direct investment from other developing countries. Security cooperation components of the agreement became operational immediately, with Pakistani military advisors arriving to help train Burkinabe forces in counter-terrorism techniques. However, the primary focus remained on addressing root causes of extremism through economic development and educational opportunities. The Textile Industry Development Program attracted particular attention from international observers, given Pakistan's global leadership in cotton processing and garment manufacturing. Burkinabe cotton, renowned for its exceptional quality, would provide raw materials for world-class textile facilities that could compete successfully in global markets. Gold mining partnerships faced some initial skepticism from international markets accustomed to Western-controlled extraction operations. However, Pakistani expertise in mineral processing and commitment to value-added production locally generated interest from buyers seeking ethically sourced precious metals. Regional economic integration emerged as an unexpected benefit of the Pakistan partnership. Improved transportation infrastructure connecting Burkina Faso to coastal ports would benefit neighboring landlocked countries while creating new trade opportunities throughout West Africa. Chinese observers followed implementation progress with particular interest, seeing potential complementarity between Pakistani industrial development and Chinese infrastructure investments in the region. Some analysts suggested that successful coordination between Asian development partners could accelerate African economic transformation. Ibrahim's popularity soared among ordinary Burkinabe citizens as construction projects began creating visible changes throughout the country. Job opportunities multiplied rapidly as Pakistani companies hired local workers for everything from construction to administration of the expanding partnership programs. However, traditional elites who had profited from existing economic arrangements began organizing opposition to the Pakistani partnership. Some business leaders complained about potential disruption to established relationships with European companies, while certain government officials worried about reduced opportunities for corruption in the more transparent Pakistani system. International development organizations expressed mixed reactions to the Pakistan model. Some praised the emphasis on genuine technology transfer and local capacity building, while others questioned whether developing countries had sufficient resources and expertise to support such ambitious partnerships effectively. 2 years after the historic signing ceremony, the transformation of Burkina Faso exceeded even the most optimistic predictions. The massive industrial complex outside Ouagadougou employed over 15,000 workers, making it the largest manufacturing center in West Africa. Pakistani and Burkinabe engineers worked side by side in state-of-the-art facilities that produced textiles, processed gold, and manufactured electronics for both domestic and export markets. Ibrahim Traore stood on the observation deck of the complex's administration building, watching trucks loaded with finished products heading toward ports in Ghana and Ivory Coast. The sight never failed to amaze him. His landlocked nation was now exporting billions of dollars worth of manufactured goods, rather than just raw materials to foreign processors. The economic statistics told an incredible success story. Burkina Faso's gross domestic product had grown by 47% in 2 years, the fastest growth rate in African history. Unemployment had dropped from over 60% to less than 15%, as new industries created hundreds of thousands of jobs throughout the country. Dr. Rashid Ahmed visited regularly to monitor progress and address challenges as they arose. The Pakistani minister had become a hero to ordinary Burkinabe citizens who credited him with bringing genuine prosperity to their nation. Streets and schools had been named in his honor, reflecting popular gratitude for the transformative partnership. The textile industry had become Burkina Faso's largest export sector, with Burkinabe cotton processed locally into high-quality fabrics, sold worldwide. Pakistani expertise in design, marketing, and quality control had enabled Burkinabe textile companies to compete successfully against established manufacturers from Bangladesh, Vietnam, and other traditional textile exporters. Gold processing operations generated even greater revenues than projected. Instead of selling raw ore at discount prices to foreign smelters, Burkina Faso now refined its gold locally using advanced Pakistani technology. Finished gold products commanded premium prices on international markets, with profits shared equitably. Between both partner nations, agricultural modernization had transformed rural areas throughout the country. Pakistani agricultural experts had introduced drought-resistant crops, efficient irrigation systems, and mechanized farming techniques that tripled average crop yields. Food security improved dramatically, while agricultural exports generated substantial foreign exchange earnings. The educational partnership produced remarkable results as young Burkinabe citizens returned from Pakistani universities with advanced technical skills needed for modern industries. Local technical colleges established with Pakistani assistance trained thousands of workers in manufacturing, engineering, and business management skills. Transportation infrastructure improvements connected previously isolated rural areas to national and international markets. The railway linking Burkina Faso to ports in Ghana reduced shipping costs by over 60%, making exports more competitive while reducing prices of imported goods for domestic consumers. Telecommunications infrastructure had brought high-speed internet and mobile networks to remote villages throughout the country. Pakistani companies had built communication systems that connected farmers to market information, students to educational resources, and entrepreneurs to global business opportunities. The success of the Burkina Faso model inspired similar partnerships throughout Africa. Mali, Niger, Chad, and Senegal negotiated their own development agreements with Pakistan, creating a network of South-South cooperation that bypassed traditional Western-dominated trade relationships. International recognition of the partnership's success came from unexpected sources. The World Bank praised the model as an example of effective development cooperation that actually benefited recipient populations rather than enriching foreign consultants and contractors. Even some Western economists acknowledged the superiority of the Pakistani approach to traditional aid programs. However, success also brought new challenges and opposition. Some Western companies that had lost business in Burkina Faso lobbied their governments to pressure Pakistan to modify its African partnerships. French officials complained about reduced access to Burkinabe gold and cotton markets that had previously been dominated by European companies. Ibrahim faced attempted coup and assassination plots organized by opponents who wanted to restore the old system of foreign exploitation. Pakistani security advisors helped strengthen his protection while addressing root causes of opposition through continued economic development that benefited all citizens. The environmental sustainability of Pakistani industries impressed international observers. Solar and wind power supplied over 70% of the industrial complex's energy needs, while waste recycling systems minimized pollution. These clean technologies demonstrated that rapid industrialization didn't require environmental destruction. Cultural exchanges between Pakistan and Burkina Faso flourished as the economic partnership deepened. Pakistani restaurants opened in Ouagadougou while Burkinabe cultural centers were established in Karachi and Lahore. Intermarriage between Pakistani technicians and Burkinabe professionals created lasting personal bonds between the two nations. Regional economic integration accelerated as improved transportation networks connected Burkina Faso to neighboring countries. The industrial complex became a manufacturing hub serving markets throughout West Africa, creating employment opportunities for workers from multiple countries. Chinese investment began complementing Pakistani industrial development, as Beijing recognized the success of the model. Coordinated Asian investment in African development promised to create alternatives to Western-dominated economic systems that had kept the continent impoverished despite abundant natural resources. Ibrahim's international stature grew as other African leaders sought his advice on negotiating successful South-South partnerships. He became a symbol of African economic independence and was frequently invited to speak at international conferences about sustainable development and post-colonial economic relationships. The billion-dollar partnership had transformed not just Burkina Faso's economy, but also its citizens' sense of dignity and self-worth. For the first time since independence, Burkinabe people could point to industries, universities, and infrastructure projects that belonged to them rather than foreign corporations. As Ibrahim looked toward the future, he envisioned Burkina Faso becoming completely self-sufficient within another decade, while serving as a model for genuine development cooperation between nations of the global South. The partnership with Pakistan had proven that alternatives to economic colonialism were not just possible, but highly successful. The young president who had risked everything to break free from cycles of exploitation and dependency had not only succeeded, but had also created a blueprint for African economic liberation that would inspire generations of leaders throughout the continent.